Hi, I'm Charlie Goldsmith. We're here at the Bleav Network, and it is NFL draft season. It's combine week, and it's a specifically interesting class for a Bengals defense that needs some major investments, but fortunately, it sounds like a very standout a class of defensive linemen. To bring that down, we're here with Joe Deleone. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I just got here in Indy. You and I are swapping places. I just landed. You're on the way out, but couldn't be more excited to get to see these guys on the field and see some of these premier defensive prospects that the Bengals certainly could take advantage of.
Now, when you look at the combine, you look at defensive linemen specifically, and you look at the drills they do, et cetera. What are the traits you're most standing out for that you think translate best to the league?
Yeah, I think that first of all, the athletic testing, the 40 time is something that we get really caught up with and that we get really excited about. I'm not super worried about that. I'm worried about the 10-yard split number. I'm worried about how quickly does that guy get off the snap, because we're not going to see Kenneth Grant's not testing today, but we're not going to see somebody like Kenneth Grant run 40 yards downfield. But the get off, the guys who have a quick explosive burst off the snap, that's what's rare to find. Those elite top tier numbers are things that are highly coveted. The short area stuff is one of the most underrated aspects of talking about defensive lineman prospects, that it doesn't really get televised, doesn't get the recognition, because any defensive lineman that can quickly pivot and change direction at their massive frame size are the ones that typically go on to be really good defensive players in the NFL. A lot of times, these guys that have poor three cone and short shuttle numbers, they tend to have a tough time translating to the NFL. It's a reflection of their flexibility and their feet and their footwork and all of that. And then when we get on field, outside of also, by the way, the jumps are also very important, going in line with that burst conversation. But on the field, I love to see from these defensive linemen, how fluidly are they moving? Flexibility is something that, one, is not effectively talked about enough when we're talking about draft prospects, but I don't think it's given enough recognition for what it means for a prospect. Flexibility usually leads to guys being able to just move and be fluid and easy moving on the field. If they're able to do it in an open setting like this, the combine, again, that's another thing that translates to guys doing really well in the NFL.
So before we get to this year's class, one of my takeaways from the 2024 NFL season was how many rookie defensive linemen you saw come in and produce immediately. Look at what the Rams did, restructuring their whole defensive line and rebuilding around Jared Verse and Braden Fisk. You look at a nice rookie year from Chop Robinson, Laetele too, a guy who maybe didn't have the most production, but I'm a big fan of. Obviously, looking at how the Vikings believed as strongly as Dallas Turner and as they did. Washington had some nice rookie defensive line pieces as well. Were there any trends you saw last year when you looked at the defensive line class of 2024 and then saw some guys succeed and, of course, some guys maybe less so at the next level?
I think one of the funniest things about last year's class, you just named so many guys that were important players for their teams. People forget that last year around this time, we were talking about how the edge class was weak, and there just wasn't any sexy names, and the defensive tackle class was fine, but it wasn't anything tremendous. And then you see what the Rams did, where they double dipped. I think we're going to see a lot of that this year. I think with how many good defensive tackles there are, that you could go on to have guys on day 3 that eventually end up being contributing important starters. I with the edge class as well. I have I've watched a ton of edge prospects, and I have guys that are I've got 15 or so guys, and I have a ton more that I have to get through that have as high as day 2 picks. So there's an opportunity, especially again with the Bengals needing a little bit of juice here, for a team like that to, look and want to say, hey, let's draft the guy in the first round, and then let's come back in the 5th round, draft 2 pass rushers or 2 defensive tackles, or an edge rusher and an edge rusher and a defensive tackle. This is the year for teams that need to build up front on defense to aggressively attack it.
So you mentioned the edge guys. Let's start with the edge guys. Looking at the Bengals, we know that AFC North style football is something that they honestly maybe even believe in more than they did a few years ago. And they consistently lean into size on the edge. They consistently lean into a combination of versatility, a combination of physicality, not just pure speed guys. And of course, the guys who can do it all, those would be your top 5 picks, your Abdul Carters, your Jalen Walkers. Are there some guys who have more well-rounded games that you think will last into the middle of the first round on the edge?
Yeah, I think the first guy that comes up, and you're bringing up all these guys that are super athletic, traitsy players. Mykel Williams fits into that. Shamar Stewart fits into that maybe don't have as much production. The first guy that I think of that has the production, has the motor, has the hand usage, it's Mike Green from Marshall. He at a lower level playing in the group of 5 at Marshall, he had a tremendous production when it was one of the top sack getters this season. And the reason why he was able to do that was because he was relentless. His motor was through the roof and he knew how to use his hands to win. And this isn't somebody who was just purely succeeding off of the fact that he was going up against a bunch of G5 opponents. They have film like he did against Ohio State where he still found success and he was able to get sacks. So the first player that like I immediately think of these edge rushers that enters that discussion that's just high floor, that could be reliable, that should be on the Bengals radar is Mike Green from Marshall.
I'm going to take this next question in kind of a fun direction. Look at a tier, and you might organize these tiers differently. But behind the top 2, let's look at, I'm going to ask you a question to name one of these guys. You look at Shamar Stewart, you look at Mike Green, you look at Michael Williams, James Pierce, throw in any other edge rusher you'd like maybe in that tier. Which one of these guys is best against the run?
Of the guys that you just named that
one more time. Stewart,
sorry.
Green, Williams, Pierce, maybe anyone else, maybe a Jack Sawyer in there or something. Who is the best against the run?
The best against the run is Michael Williams. And that's kind of like part of where the knock comes into play with Michael Williams, because a lot of his production and success came against the run, and he doesn't have very much as a pass rusher because he doesn't use his hands well enough as a pass rusher. But where he's able to win is he's just so physical and he's so powerful and he's so strong at the point of attack that he can anchor, he can hold the line of scrimmage, and then he can use his length to clear blockers and grab onto ball carriers. So if there's somebody that jumps right into the NFL and has really good tackle for loss production against the run, I think it's Michael Williams. My comp for him, I think he's Jadeveon Clowney. Jadeveon Clowney was like super premier athlete that everyone had high hopes for that didn't totally pan out. But what he was consistently great at was kicking butt against the run. He was so great at creating plays against the run. And that was where he thrived and why he kept finding jobs and keeps finding jobs in the NFL. I think that Michael Williams, if he doesn't fully hit, he could still be as good as Jadeveon Clowney.
One more question about this tier of players, and I'll ask the question first, and then I'll say the names.
Okay.
Who has the best intangibles? If you look at Stewart, Green, Williams, Pierce, the Ohio State guys, anyone else you want to throw into that maybe middle of the first round tier or slightly below, who has the best intangibles?
Yeah, I think that, man, that's an interesting question because there's just general concerns for a lot of those more athletic guys that we look at. I would say JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State would be the guy who fits the category of having some of the best intangibles. He stuck around for this extra year to be able to try and achieve winning a national championship. He's another player that you see the effort that he puts in on every single snap. Another guy that's really good against the run that just needs to improve his hand usage as a pass rusher. When we're talking intangibles, I'm looking for guys that are good decision makers on the field, that are cerebral, and that are high effort players that have also shown signs of gradual improvement year over year. JT Tuimoloau probably not going to be a first round pick. Maybe he does end up sneaking in there because the NFL just values his leadership qualities and who he is as a young man. But he could end up being just a really nice quality player on day 2 for a team that's just looking for somebody who brings consistent impact somewhere on day 2.
Looking at the defensive tackle class, I mean, the first thing that popped out to me, obviously the depth. And they seem like some big guys for the defensive tackle position. Is that something you notice, particularly guys who can, maybe they're not the Braden Fisk speed guys, and that's fine. Fisk was a second round pick. Does the size and kind of run pass versatility of this group stand out at the top of the class?
Yeah, we have a lot of freakish athleticism too in this group. And Kenneth Grant not testing again, which stinks, but like this is a guy at 340 pounds who could have ran a 4.840. That's what's crazy about the group is that there's just so much athleticism and there's a lot of size. Mason Graham was a little under 300 pounds, but like he's a massive, wide defensive tackle prospect that plays super low. Guys like Derek Harmon, who just mauling, great length for the position that he brings to the field. There are a lot of options that, like you just said, that do bring versatility, that show and are able to use their length to win against the run and against the pass. Maybe we probably won't get a lot of guys that go on to be, crazy sack producers, but anyone who's going to create that disruption on a snap to snap basis, there's just a lot of different directions that we can turn to because there's so many options that fit so many different roles.
Can you describe how Michigan used Graham and Grant kind of off each other, the roles they played, where they lined up, and how that duo was?
Yeah, it's kind of funny looking at these two dudes and how they played it at Michigan because the way that they were deployed maybe isn't the way that they're going to get utilized in the NFL because Kenneth Grant's got the build of a nose tackle, but he could certainly play as a one tech, and they were able to use the physical presence and the overwhelming strength of Grant to free up Mason Graham's quickness and low pad level and hand usage and burst to finish to create sack production, to create tackle for loss production. I think that Kenneth Grant, like I said, is going to end up in the league as a one tech or a zero tech that is just going to be hell for centers to deal with. He reminds me a lot of Dexter Lawrence, and I think you could actually get similar sack production to what Dexter Lawrence has done for the New York Giants, where he takes up so much space and he has good hands to clear blockers as a pass rusher. Mason Graham, though, is an intriguing player because he can play in any role. I think that in third down rush situations, he can come in and play inside as a one tech. He can play head up on a center, but he's got that quickness and the ability to disengage from blockers to be a great three tech. He, to me, out of any prospect, I think is the most versatile that could be used in any sub package, any situation, and is going to find consistency in causing problems for opposing offensive lines.
Two more questions. First, an offensive line question with the Bengals. Is this a good class if you want a guy who could play guard right now and maybe kick out to tackle? Could you find that guy with a first round option?
With a first round option, certainly, but I've been saying this a lot throughout the cycle. You're losing options when we start to look on day 2 and on day 3. It's a very thin group. There is not a lot of depth, but the guys at guard and that could play a tackle, it starts with Will Campbell. Will Campbell to me is a guard because he's under that 33-inch threshold in his arms. And he's just not like a crazy, insane athlete that he's going to overcome that. But he's good enough, I think, to eventually be a really steady Pro Bowler consistently in the NFL and could eventually go on to be a Hall of Famer because he knows how to win with his technique, his body placement, his hand usage, all of those things. But there's tons of options like with guys like Tyler Booker from Alabama, who is just wide and reliable, or Jonah Savanea from Arizona is somebody who I think needs to get brought up more often, who's a tackle that's bumping inside a guard, who didn't have a great Senior Bowl, but could be a name to keep track of for these teams that need somebody that has big frame, great power, light feet, and again, just reliability. He fits that description.
Bengals bring in Notre Dame defensive coordinator Al Golden, to foundational pieces, Benjamin Morrison before he got hurt, what you're looking for in a corner, and then Xavier Watts. I don't know that there was a more fun safety to watch. What stood out just when you look at Notre Dame's secondary this year?
Yeah, and having followed that Notre Dame run so closely, being a Notre Dame fan, he Benjamin Morrison, we didn't get like enough exposure to, but I thought he still had an underrated season, albeit with the injury that he suffered. Still something to be focused on if you're an NFL team, and it's probably going to create a little bit of a slide for him because he's slight of frame and he's had shoulder issues, hip issues. But Xavier Watts, like knowing how to creatively deploy him to just go out there and be a ball hawking guy that has the instincts that once the ball's in the air, he's going to attack it and he's going to make plays and come down with it, or at the very least disrupt the catch point. I really like that thought of like paying attention to if Al Golden wants to reunite with Xavier Watts, because over the last 2 years, there hasn't been somebody who's been more productive than Xavier Watts at forcing turnovers the way that he has. And Al Golden, I think, has been a really big driving force for that huge degree of success he's played with.
Let's do one more fun one, not related to the Bengals, but who's the third best quarterback in the class?
Man, this has been like my least favorite question, but it is a fun one to answer because the quarterback class sucks. Like, I'm just going to be straight up here. It's not a good class, but I think it's Jackson Dart. I think that Jackson Dart is the more reliable option because he's played so much ball. He's an underrated athlete. At times he can be a good decision maker. He's got the touch and the poise and all those things that you're trying to get with a quarterback prospect. but he's more likely to be a long-term backup. I compare him to Derek Carr, where when he came into the league out of Fresno State, where he played a ton of ball at Fresno State. He comes in, not much of an expectation for him to start, but he shows his poise and his leadership, and that helped him get onto the field early, and eventually it parlayed into a long career and some good seasons with the Raiders. Just doesn't have that ceiling to go on to be like a super dangerous top 5 quarterback starter. So Dart can carve out a role maybe somewhere. At the very least, he's exactly what you look for in a quality backup, which should be the leading discussion for any of these quarterbacks outside of the top 2.
Well, that'll do it for this episode of the Bleav NFL on the Bleav NFL Network. Thank you for joining us. The prospects, I believe, as we record this, are hitting the field in about 10 minutes. Some more information, more is about to change. We're about to learn a lot more about this class, and let's get this process started. Thank you for joining us.